Liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, SC off. Bring in, SC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Hello everyone, welcome to another NASA spaceflight stream. It is launch day in Wallops, Virginia. We have an Antares rocket on the pad with Cygnus. Before we get into intros, just a reminder, get your questions in chat at NASASpaceflight. We will answer as many as possible. I am Stephen Marr. I'm one of the photographers here for NASA Spaceflight based out of the Space Coast, which gives me an opportunity to be on stream today because this is launching from Wallops, Virginia. Joining me today, we have our assistant managing editor, Chris Gebhardt. How you doing, Chris?
I am doing just fine. How are you, Stephen?
Oh, I'm pretty good. And up there, traveling up to Wallops for us, we have Thomas Berghardt. How you doing in that wind out there, Thomas?
Oh, this isn't the Florida weather we're used to. It's a little cold and a little windy, but nevertheless, a beautiful day for launch. The skies are crystal clear, hoping for a beautiful ascent for Antares and Cygnus NG-17 today.
Yeah, I like the way this is framed up. Looks like, I know that's probably not actually wheat, but it looks like wheat just blowing in the breeze there. What are the, what's the wind speed out there right now?
It has been varying throughout the day. It is actually kind of right near the limits of launch weather criteria, which is actually the main risk item they cited in their pre-launch weather forecast of the surface level winds getting too high. However, the winds have been reported green throughout the countdown so far and are expected to remain just within the limits to allow an on-time liftoff today. So, hoping that the winds continue to cooperate. We've been fighting the tripod all morning to try and get this camera as stable as we can. Hopefully it's pretty all right now, but so hopefully the winds behave, and so far they have.
Yeah, and thanks everyone in chat for sticking around while we dealt with technical issues, mainly just that tripod and the wind. That's basically what we've been dealing with.
We don't want to get anyone seasick on the streams here, so we tried to make it a little better.
Right, yeah, but I like the way it has it's turned out with the framing. I really like having all that blowing in the breeze there. It's really cool.
It's a nice aesthetic for Wallops, right? You've got the mountains of Vandenberg, the water of Florida, the wheat of Wallops.
Yeah. Well, we are approaching T-minus 20 minutes, or L-minus 20 minutes. Actually, right. There's a good question right there. Why are we displaying L-minus instead of T-minus?
Yes. So launch minus is the actual time remaining until the liftoff is scheduled. So in this regard, L minus, sometimes the T minus clock does not match the L minus clock because there are built-in holds in the countdown. So what we opt to do a lot of the times is to use the L minus clock. That way everyone knows exactly how far away from the anticipated liftoff we are. So L minus 20 minutes to go for the Antares rocket here today. So that is the difference between L minus, and T minus is literally the time that is left on the clock. So if there are built-in holds, that's why it might not matter. But yes, and on board is the SS Piers Sellers Cygnus, continuing Northrop Grumman's long-standing tradition of naming the Cygnus spacecraft after people who were instrumental to the field of space exploration, and this continuing a trend to name Cygnus spacecraft as well after astronauts who have passed away. And Piers Sellers, not just a veteran of 3 space shuttle missions, but also a very staunch environmentalist and environmental activist as well, and sadly a very good person, very sadly lost to cancer. So Northrop Grumman doing him that honor of giving him a spacecraft named after him.
Yeah, and that's sort of a thing that Northrop Grumman has been doing with all of the Cygnus spacecraft, right?
Indeed, every Cygnus spacecraft does indeed get a name. Some have been astronauts, some have been others who are just instrumental, both within Northrop Grumman and outside of Northrop Grumman, in propelling space exploration forward in some regard.
Well, cool.
Indeed.
I feel like, because we started a little later, so we have a little less time to talk about everything, but I wanted to talk about the payloads, and one in particular that our buddy Doss pointed out to us is the Moon Gallery, this art project that's going up that has all of these little cubbies, and these are like tiny cubbies, but there's art in each one. There's 64. It's a 64 space grid with these centimeter cube spaces in them, and they have these tiny little pieces of art by 64 different artists. Yeah. What did you think about that? We just saw that for the first time this morning before we went on stream, right?
Yeah, I mean, so some of these are pretty interesting. The official release talks about so the Moon Gallery test flight, specifically with nanoracks up to the International Space Station. It's 64 physical artifacts and one engraved piece of artwork for 64 total. Basically, projects that are being featured to reach the final frontier of human habitat and mark the historical meeting point of humanity with the cosmos. So, like, one of them, in particular, we were discussing before we came on air, is a potential like tattoo, an artwork of a tattoo to like remind future astronauts of where humanity first evolved and everything. So there are cool little things like that. There are weird things in it too, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it is kind of cool, and it just sort of demonstrates the different ways that payload space can be used. And there are a lot of other scientific payloads that we're going to get to here in a second
Right.
too. But this artwork is kind of unique, and you don't always see those types of payloads featured. So I know we wanted to draw a little bit of attention to that here.
Yeah. What other kind of payloads, notable payloads, do we have on board?
Yes, indeed. So on board the NG-17 Cygnus resupply vehicle, there is a skin protecting experiment on board that's specifically looking at the deterioration of skin cells as a normal part of aging that occurs over decades, and using microgravity to sort of study those changes, because some of those changes accelerate at microgravity, so we can more quickly and easily study potential skin aging alleviation elements, that's not the right word, treatments. There we go. To both help and assist with, how brittle skin becomes as we age here on the ground, but also to protect future astronauts and other explorers in lower gravity environments. We also have some hydrogen sensor demonstrations that are on board. Space as Lib, specifically from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, so one of the international partners on the space station, has a new lithium-ion battery technology that they are going to test that is on board. There is and you have to say it this way, plants in space experiment.
Can we add some reverb to that?
Exactly. So this is an experiment looking at soil growth mediums in microgravity to facilitate better crop yields here on Earth with changing environments and climates, as well as future uses for long-duration space exploration when you have to grow your own food.
I love anytime they're talking about growing food in space. I love it because it points to the future of humanity living and working in space, and I love that.
Right, and exactly. And there's also a fire safety experiment on board. Fire safety, of course, is very instrumental and crucial in space exploration. The Apollo 1 fire definitely highlights the incredible risk that we have to mitigate when fires break out in spacecraft, and we have done a very good job over the years of bringing that to fruition. But continuing to study and improve that fire safety is a very critical experiment that will be ongoing aboard the ISS as well, that is launching on board this mission. And as well, there is also a cancer treatment experiment that is on board. It is called the Microquin 3D tumor. experiment, and it's specifically using breast and prostate cancer cells to examine cell proteins that can be specifically targeted by drugs. And this is important, and this is a moment to stop and say, just because they use a specific type of cancer cell does not mean that that is the only type of cancer the experiment helps. Because there are certain things like T cells, receptor cells, messenger RNA inside of cancer cells that are more prevalent, right? So you can use things like a breast cancer cell or a prostate cancer cell as stand-ins for other types of cancer cells, in this case also including leukemia cells. And I wanted to also point out an experiment ongoing on board the International Space Station that is specifically using messenger RNA as a potential, looking at that as a cancer immunotherapy, basically, and that's basically a big scientific scary phrase for saying there are portions of our genetic code that we can create medicines that go and create messenger RNA that go and look for specific types of genes that we know are associated with cancers. So this messenger-based RNA drug system can end up targeting a cancer cell, but right next to it, leaving the good cell alone.
Nice.
And this has incredible, I mean, and very specifically, it is a treatment for leukemia. And that sort of brings me to something that I wanted to highlight. So if you are watching this in chat, in our pinned chat, if you so desire, we wanted to bring your attention to the Team Boyertown Legacy group of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They are currently raising money for leukemia and lymphoma research here on Earth, but also applicable experiments on the International Space Station. If you would like to help them, please click on that link that is pinned in chat. But that is the link to check. That is the way to help them. You must click that link. So if you are so inclined to help Team Boyertown Legacy and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, please follow that link. So
Cool.
thank you. So thank you in advance to everyone who does choose to assist. But we wanted to bring your attention to that, also very specifically because there were related experiments on this particular vehicle and on the International Space Station. So that
And
is
that's
an
just one
overview of
go
the
ahead.
experiments that are on board. Yes.
Very, very cool.
Yeah,
What,
I just-
Thomas?
I just wanted to reiterate because people always ask, there's a common argument is, how does spaceflight help us here on Earth? And the International Space Station is just such a great example of that. For example, medical research. Using microgravity as this extra factor that can help you research things in a different way is super, super cool. And always love talking about that when there's ISS missions like this.
Yep, absolutely. I think as we are, we're approaching about T-minus 11 minutes or so. Let's try to hit some of these questions before we get too
Yeah.
close to liftoff.
Yes, indeed.
Let's start with our traditional first question coming from Musical Wolves. What are those 5 towers? Now they're saying 5.
Oh.
Let's go with 5.
Okay, all right. Now I got questions because there's a rocket that you can count as the tower. There's a water tower. So I don't know which 5 he's actually talking about. We're gonna start with the 4 that are the standard ones. Those are lightning protection towers. They're also light towers, I think. But those are the lightning protection system. The pad 0A at Wallops Flight Facility does have our good old-fashioned lightning protection system. There's also a water tower, and of course, there's also a rocket.
All right. Thank you, Musical Wolves, and everyone. I mean, there's there's always a bunch of copies of that question. Thank you very much. Carson Reed was wondering, will the Canadian arm grab the payload? Are they going to be using the Canada arm for this?
Yes, indeed. That is a great question. Yes, so Cygnus does not dock to the International Space Station like the Cargo and Crew Dragon vehicles from SpaceX, the other current U.S. Cargo provider. So it approaches the International Space Station. It gets about 10 meters underneath the complex, and then Canadarm2 reaches out to a grapple fixture point on Cygnus, grabs hold of it, and then berths it to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module's common berthing mechanism. So that is how Cygnus is attached, and then the process is just reversed when Cygnus is released at the end of its mission.
Very cool.
Oh, but there's something cool on this mission that we really need to talk about that Cygnus is going to do. That's
Okay.
Oh
planned.
yeah. Can I
It's-
talk about this one?
Yes, go for it. Go for it. Yes.
Okay, so the International Space Station at its altitude, which is a little over 400 kilometers, does over time lose a little bit of altitude because there's still a little bit of atmospheric drag at that altitude. Obviously, it takes many, many orbits for you to even notice the difference, but it does happen. So every once in a while, the station performs what is called a reboost maneuver, which actually uses a docked vehicle, up until now a Russian Progress vehicle almost always, to just give a little bit extra velocity and boost that orbit back up to the altitude that they need it at. You'll often see this right before crew launches and things like that, because they also want to make sure they have the exact right orbits for crew dockings and things like that. However, tested last year on a different Cygnus mission, they actually used the engine on the Cygnus spacecraft to conduct a very brief reboost maneuver, not a full maneuver, to actually raise altitude. It lasted less than a minute and raised the orbit by like 200 feet or something, so barely anything. However, this Cygnus will conduct a real reboost maneuver, a full duration, actual operational orbit raising maneuver, and that allows them to reduce the demands on the Russian vehicles so they can have different propellant margins on their end and not always need to be preserving all of their propellant for the reboost operations, because the Cygnus spacecraft, the American Cygnus spacecraft, can conduct some of those operations now as well. And this is the first spacecraft that will be doing that operationally.
Yes, and with that, it also becomes, I mean, this is really cool. It's the first U.S. spacecraft to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, yes, it is the first U.S. spacecraft to do one, which is very good.
Off the top of my head, I know Progress has been the one that has almost always done it. Has any other ever done it? I don't think so. Right?
Okay. To be fair, it is the only current U.S. vehicle to do it. The shuttle did it.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
And I'm going to throw this out there because maybe there are some that are asking this themselves. Why doesn't the space station have its own engines to do its orbit boosts?
It does actually. We just don't really use them anymore.
Right. They're weaker than the engines on the docking vehicles. They're more akin to RCS thrusters. So it just makes more sense from an operational standpoint to use the actual engines that are on Progress or Cygnus.
But the Zvezda service module, which is the aft module of the Russian segment that the Progresses and Soyuzes can dock to on the aft segment of the station, has thrusters to do it, and was actually used within the last year to do one of the emergency dodge maneuvers away from debris. So they are still used, but Thomas is correct. When possible, they use the Progress over the Zvezda engines.
Cool. This one here from Tiguan saying, "Is the Cygnus spacecraft the only big dump truck for the ISS currently?" I'm not sure that dump truck is the term that NASA would use.
Nor Northrop Grumman.
Yeah. What are we referring to here?
Yes, so Cygnus cannot survive atmospheric reentry. However, it has a gigantic cargo volume inside of it. So the specifics for this particular mission, Cygnus is bringing up 3,729 kilograms, or around 8,200 pounds of cargo elements and supplies for the station. And it will return, and the crew will then repack almost that same exact amount back into the vehicle for trash disposal at the end of the mission. So in that regard, it is a huge dump truck for the ISS, and yes, in that regard, it's the biggest. Yes.
And they've used it.
Although I really wouldn't call it that, but I understand what you're asking. Yes.
And they've used it for other purposes too. They've actually performed science on their way towards their deorbit, right?
Yes, they have actually purposefully ignited fires safely inside of Cygnus to study fire suppression and new materials to help mitigate the spread of fire should it break out in spacecraft. So Cygnus is a very good test bed for experiments on the International Space Station. And while it has not actually been used in this regard yet, there is the capability, should NASA ever want it, that you could launch a Cygnus, have it go up and deliver its cargo. The crew could put science experiments inside of it, detach it, let it free fly for a few days or weeks with those science experiments, and then come back to the station and take them all out if it needed to leave. Other Cygnuses have also included science racks so that for the 3 months that Cygnus is there, it can start to double as an additional scientific module for the ISS. So Cygnus is a very, very multi-use and multi-capable vehicle, even though it is disposable at the end of its flight.
All right, we're getting within 4 minutes. Let's try to squeeze in a couple more questions. Nero asking, they just set up a resupply mission to the ISS. Why send another one in less than a week?
Ah, yes. Well, that is because the space station is a very busy vehicle. On average, about 3 Cygnus vehicles go a year, about 3 to 4 Progresses, and about 3 to 4, depending on the year, cargo dragons will go to the ISS. So there is a routine and rapid cadence to this because of the science experiments that we are trying to get up there and constantly cycling those science experiments up and down and replenishing the crew and food supplies. And Thomas, I've been talking a while, so the next question is yours if the wind is not bad.
Okay, sure. You're doing a great job answering, so no problems here.
Here's a bit of a softball as we're approaching liftoff from Randall saying, how do they know when the water tower is full?
Oh man, I don't think they do the same thing that they
Does it
do
not
at
do that
KC.
here?
I've never seen it do it. At 39A, we actually see the water tower overflow, and it's like, well, the water tower is full.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that happen here. I guess keep an eye out. If someone sees that happen, let me know. I don't remember it happening last time I was here, but that would be cool.
Yeah. This one's kind of neat, coming from Wesley Hale saying, we machine a lot of parts for Northrop Grumman at my work here in Utah, but we rarely know what the parts are for. What are the chances I've made parts for this rocket or launch mount?
It's not impossible, but Northrop Grumman makes a lot of things, and if you're making things that you're not allowed to know what they're for, they're probably not for civilian spaceflight.
True.
I mean, they could be, but it's not necessarily likely.
I will pivot to this. The way it could be true is there's a lot of commonality between the Northrop Grumman
That's
vehicles.
true.
So
Just
that
because
might
they're
be
made
where
for
the
other
odds
things,
are in
they
your
might also
favor.
be used. Yeah, I
Yeah.
gotcha. That's a good point.
All right. We're within 2 minutes. I'm going to hit a couple super chats real quick. Camper News Network, $28 saying, let's hope we can light this candle for my birthday. Thank you very much for that support.
Woohoo.
Hamster Space, I'm out here. It's really cold. Thank you, Hamster Space Nerd.
Can confirm.
Remy Turk saying, what are those 4 flagpoles? I think we mentioned that. Frank Brandt saying, thank you, NSF. Thank you very much for that support. Let's see. Within a minute and a half, I say we kind of chill and wait for liftoff. What do you think?
Indeed. So under a minute and 20 seconds to the launch of the NG-17 mission with the SS Piers Sellers Cygnus craft bound for the International Space Station. And remember, too, if you are so inclined
within 30 seconds.
To help our friends at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, there is a link pinned in chat where you can help them with their causes. And here we go with the final 20 seconds to liftoff. Five seconds. We have ignition and liftoff of the Antares rocket with the NG-17 mission and thousands of kilograms of science and supplies for the International Space Station. roar of the Antares and its two first-stage liquid-fueled main engines powering the vehicle up through the dense lower atmosphere. Antares is a very unique rocket in that it does not throttle down for max Q, or the moment of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle. And
Hit that
Antares,
contrail.
yep, that contrail at around 11 kilometers, 33,000 feet. That's what we like to see with our liquid-fueled vehicles. Antares heading out straight and true to the southeast out of Wallops. A very quick overview of a part of the flight. The first stage will burn for 3 minutes and 24 seconds. That is a very long burn of the first stage, and will take the vehicle to an altitude of 89.2 kilometers, at which point we should have main engine cutoff in preparation for stage separation. But everything going well with the Antares right now. And when the staging actually occurs, there's some things to talk about, because Antares has a solid rocket upper stage that has to do a very accurate orbital insertion. So we're going to talk about how it does that here and what is going on during the staging events. But right now, continuing on in first stage flight for the NG-17 Cygnus cargo mission to the ISS.
Start to see the first stage engine, the exhaust expanding as it's reaching higher and higher into the atmosphere.
Indeed, that air pressure no longer confining the plume there, so we get to see it expand. And for those of you who have joined us, this is live coverage and live views of the launch of the Antares rocket from Wallops Island and Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia.
The lesser used launch facility, but always cool to see Antares launch out of here.
It is indeed, yeah. A launch range that is used more for sounding rockets and suborbital missions than it is for orbital flights most of the time. So coming up here on the anticipated cutoff of the first stage and separation, and the separation sequence here. See Antares really downrange, and there is engine cutoff, it would appear. So what is happening now? So the stages have separated. Now inside of the payload fairings, which we'll separate here in a second, is Cygnus and the second stage. That second stage is a solid fuel Castor 30 XL. So right now, the flight computers are gathering all the data of where the first stage left them, velocity, altitude, trajectory, all of that, to gather all their states and calculate how to get Cygnus into the proper 172 by 317 kilometer target orbit. Once that happens, once the guidance system locks on to a solution, you will hear that they'll say something along the lines of guidance lock, which should have happened by now. And what's going on in that thing with guidance lock, which, yep, and there we have it, the ignition of that engine. You can see the pitch program there. What that is doing is the second stage's flight computer has calculated, okay, this is how much propellant I have in me. I have to burn all of that propellant because I'm a solid rocket stage. I just can't shut down when I reach parameters. So it has calculated the path to get it to orbit that's not necessarily the most efficient, but will help scrub out additional energy that would either make your orbit too high or off course. So this is a very, very, very intricate process that the flight computers are using to basically fly in a purposefully inefficient trajectory based on the energy that is in the stage and how long you have to burn and what your payload mass is. So when you saw the vehicle pitch like that very quickly at engine ignition, or motor ignition, more like it, that's what it was doing. That's what it was compensating for, was where was I left off and where do I need to be and what's the inefficient trajectory to get me there because I'm a solid rocket vehicle.
And that's one of my favorite rocket science things out there, is just how all of that math gets done to use every bit of that propellant and still get exactly where you need to go. It's super cool.
Really is. It
Yeah,
really is.
impressive. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say I've done something similar in Kerbal, but not on purpose.
I have yet to recreate that successfully in Kerbal. Not that I haven't tried.
Yeah.
Now, things to pay attention to on the screen, you see our apogee and our perigee limits. So we are targeting 172 kilometers by 317 kilometers. That's the ideal target. If, as has happened in the past, sometimes that upper stage and the guidance system can get it so accurate that you can actually get a better injection performance out of the vehicle. So we will see what those numbers end up being here. But on the last mission, the second stage actually overperformed and actually left Cygnus with a lot more propellant than it needed to get to the ISS. So very accurate insertion on the last one too.
Wow.
I'll
And
also
how
just
long-
point out that the crystal clear skies here made for a beautiful launch viewing experience, and I hope everyone in the Mid-Atlantic region was able to catch a glimpse of that as well, because, boy, did that look and sound good.
And it was a
All
great
right.
track too, Thomas. Oh, there we
Thank
go.
you. I appreciate that.
And there we go. So the target was 172 by 317, and we're at 181 by 313 and climbing. So that is a very accurate insertion from the second stage. So standing by for payload separation, which in this case is Cygnus separation.
And that begins a journey. Cygnus will be reaching the ISS for a rendezvous very early on Monday, so a couple days until it actually reaches station.
And you can see the stage sort of reorienting now to prograde. You saw it was very steeply diving there because that's what the guidance and navigation system was doing to get it into the proper orbit. So that stage is now reorienting itself to the prograde vector for Cygnus separation. And again, on board Cygnus are 3,729 kilograms of science experiments, food, cargo, and various supplies for the International Space Station, as well as the international partners.
And that's somewhere around the 8,000 kilogram mark when you include the mass of Cygnus itself, correct?
Oh, yes, very well. Yes, very much so. Very much so.
You know, a lot of times people ask, you know, why there's no like live camera view from the second stage on some rockets, but I kind of like this view, this simulated view. It shows you like the little puffs of the RCS system and exactly what direction it's pointing and stuff. I think, you know, there is a benefit to having it like this.
Mm-hmm. And
The live telemetry is cool.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's what I was going to point out is that it is based on the live telemetry that they're getting from the vehicle. Yeah.
Right. This isn't just like a pre-recorded video that they're showing us. This is actual real life. Oh, and there you go.
Which is why actually... Oh, go ahead.
And we have Cygnus separation. So Cygnus and the SS Pearceller Cygnus is in orbit and separated from the second stage, and you could see the second stage sort of do that little divert maneuver there to clear itself out of the way of the Cygnus vehicle as the separation sequence took hold.
And sometimes that second stage in the animation then starts to freak out when the telemetry starts to end. I don't know if that happens, you should point it out because it's happened a couple times.
I think they fixed it because the telemetry lit up green with the final orbital insertion, which was 180. See, the screen moved. It was 181 by 322 was the final insertion orbit. Which, of course, will be perturbed by gravity and nodal precession and all of that fun stuff. But that is the basic average of the orbital apogee and perigee for the insertion. So a wonderfully successful mission for Northrop Grumman again. A successful flight of the Antares with Cygnus in orbit. And Thomas, you said that the rendezvous and grapple is when?
Early Monday morning, I believe around 900 UTC. That time does kind of get subject to change. Sometimes Cygnus shows up early. But early Monday morning is when it is slated to occur.
Isn't that sort of rude to show up early?
Oh, you know, I was going to make.
Listen, if you're bringing snacks, the astronauts probably won't mind.
Well, yeah, I was gonna kind of say, right? We talk so much about launches. Launches can't be early or late, right? There's sort of such a finite window for them because of orbital mechanics. But then you get on orbit, and the orbital mechanics change in such a way that you can be early.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's cool. Yeah. So we have a successful launch of Antares carrying Cygnus. So that is, we're getting close to the end here. I'm gonna scroll through some of these super chats just to say thanks to all of y'all. We've got Musical Wolves here with a quick question: is it normal for ISS resupplies to not be launching at the Cape?
Yeah,
No.
these Antares. Well, I mean,
Oh.
wait. Hold on. Maybe I misunderstood the question. The
Yeah,
Antares rockets always launch here from Wallops.
Right. Yeah, I think that's more the spirit of the question is, yeah, because ISS resupply missions do still launch from the Cape. It's just Antares launches from Wallops. So
Right.
that's it.
The cargo dragons go from the Cape. Antares goes from Wallops. The HTV vehicles from JAXA go from Tanegashima in Japan, and the Progress vehicles go from Baikonur. So, in all, in all, the answer to the question is no. It's very usual for cargo missions to not launch from the Cape.
Right.
It's also
and
possible, though, for Cygnus to launch from the Cape because occasionally they can launch on an Atlas V if they so choose. Haven't done it in a while, but they can do that.
I think the
Indeed.
first Atlas I ever saw was one carrying a Cygnus.
Yep, indeed. And part of the CRS-2 contract that they are in right now carries the option to actually have a greater cargo capacity with inside of Cygnus, which would mean it would need the Atlas. But all the Atlases are bought, so I don't think we're ever going to see
Right,
another
yeah,
one
so
on an Atlas.
we might see one
Yeah.
on a Vulcan one day, though.
That would be interesting, although I think they have upgraded Antares so much that there is pretty much no longer a need. Although if they needed to, like if anything ever happened to Antares, which is why two Cygnuses actually launched on Atlas,
Yeah.
they could do it if they had to. But there are actually no plans to do any mission aside from an Antares flight at this point.
And
But hey, here
oh,
from
go ahead.
the press site at Wallops, I'm going to have to start packing up here soon.
Okay, Thomas. Well, thank you very much for rolling out and going all the way from the Cape up to Wallops and providing a great track.
Did my best. Thanks. Glad you enjoyed. And thank you, everyone, for watching and supporting, of course. Also, a big thank you to anyone who was able to help our friends over at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Again, that link is pinned in chat. So just a big thank you to anyone who can help out there as well.
Indeed,
All
and thank
right.
you, and thanks so much, Thomas. And I personally enjoyed the pre-launch rocket wheat fields.
Yeah. Okay, real quick, running through these. Wesley Heron, kind of similar to the last question. Why is there a launch location here? Is Wallops a private spaceport? Seems like lots of available launch pads at KSC. What percentage of weight to orbit is lost due to a higher latitude? I don't know if that is such a quick question.
Okay, let me read it on the screen. I think I got them all, but yeah, let me read it on the screen. So there's a launch location at Wallops. So the Wallops Flight Facility has existed for decades and decades. It was a sounding rocket range and a test flight range, which it still primarily is. There are far more suborbital and sounding rocket flights that take place from Wallops to this day than orbital flights. Wallops is not a private spaceport. It is operated by NASA and Virginia Space. Seems like a lot of available launch pads at KSC. There are, but the range is very busy, so a lot of customers do not particularly wish to go there because of how crowded the range is down there, and there are more opportunities to sort of get the date that you want at Wallops. What percentage of weight to orbit is lost due to the higher latitude? In this case, being higher helps. Being higher to the 51.6 degree inclination that you want to get to helps. So in this case, there would be more of a, if Antares tried to launch it from Florida, there would be more of a payload hit from Florida than there is from Wallops. But you can mitigate that with different launch vehicles. But yes.
Cool. And then G Forbes just saying, as a childhood leukemia survivor, thanks are not enough. Well done, NSF. Well, thank you very much, G Forbes, and congratulations. Jim Cavett saying, thanks, guys. Happy weekend, and happy weekend to you. Cyrus asked, does Cygnus dock or berth? And I can answer that real quick. It is berthing. It'll be grabbed by the Canadarm and attached to the space station. Adam Fox, been subscribed to you since NG-16. You guys are the best. Well, thank you. You're the best, Adam. And last but not least, Ilmar saying, how long until the spent upper stage deorbits? Do we know that?
Yes, actually, with a perigee of 183 kilometers, it will come back in within 2 to 3 weeks, depending on exact atmospheric drag conditions.
Awesome. And with that, I believe we will close down the stream. Thank you so much for joining. I am Stephen Marr, one of the photographers around here. We were joined also by my colleague, assistant managing editor, Chris Gebhardt. Thank you, Chris.
Indeed, always a pleasure.
Also, again, out in the field, we had Thomas Berghardt operating the camera, and then also pulling switches, pressing buttons in the background, we had Michael Baylor controlling everything. So thank you, Michael, for doing that. And thanks again, everybody, for joining. A special thanks to our members that make it possible to send a camera wherever possible. Without your support, that may not be possible. So thanks again, and see y'all later.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
The chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers, fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down speed off. NC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.